Good evening. Welcome to Convention of States Indiana Live. Do you think we have a big problem with our federal government? If you do, stay tuned because we at Convention of States have a solution as big as the problem. Our broadcast host is Dale Parrish. He's the Convention of States Indiana State Director. Take it away, Dale.
Well, thank you, Maringo Mike. Thanks for that introduction. Glad to see you're working correctly again. Took us a little while to figure that out, but we got it figured out. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. We have another great broadcast planned for you this evening. In our first segment, we're having Debbie Stewart back to present us another chapter in constitutional literacy. And Debbie's going to be talking about the Commerce Clause and the General Welfare Clause in our Constitution. Very interesting area. Now, I want to also, before we get too far along here, I want to mention again that in the event that your screen freezes up or goes blank, just please consider that we've had a technical problem. Don't hang around. Just put us on your calendar and join us again next Monday evening at 7 p.m. So enough said on that. All right. Now, again, our format tonight is we'll start out with a discussion with Debbie Stewart, and then and this will be time permitting tonight. But then we'll get into some general information about how Convention of States is doing here in the state of Indiana. Then, again, time permitting, we'll get into the basic tenets of Convention of States. There are three basic tenets that our movement is based upon, and that's the problem, the solution, and the plan. So, time permitting, we'll talk about those. Then I want to leave time to recognize those of you that have joined us and are viewing tonight, and I'll try my best to get any comments that you make up on the screen. And please feel free to make any comments, and I would ask that you keep them short because the screen can only accommodate just so many words. If the comment's too long and I put it up there, you won't be able to read it. So, okay. So feel free to make those comments, and then we'll wrap things up this evening and talk about what we're going to be doing on our next broadcast, which of course will be on the 27th of January. So without further ado, let's bring Debbie up into the broadcast here, and we will get started on her area. There she is. Hi, Debbie.
Oh, hi. I'm going to adjust here. There we go.
Sorry, you need to get yourself kind of centered, don't you?
Yes, sir.
All right, good. All right, well, Debbie, tell us about the Commerce Clause and the General Welfare Clause.
Okay, so Michael Ferris has an entire chapter on both the General Welfare Clause and the Commerce Clause. And the main point of this chapter is that the original intent of our founders for both of these clauses found in Article 1, Section 8 was they had a limited scope for the federal government. And what you're going to hear in this whole chapter is that those two clauses have blown up to include just about anything for Congress to spend money on.
These are good examples of unintended consequences and how the what am I trying to say? Like the intent of the Supreme Court rulings can be used for future legislation and so forth. This is one of the areas where in Convention of States, this is one of the areas that we really focus on, especially when it comes to budgeting and budget matters. But I'm sorry, go ahead, Debbie.
No, no, and that's so true. And I think that those cases, he lists several of them in the book, but each case, it broadened the scope of the Commerce Clause. Each case gave the government a little more leeway in order to spend money to the point where they can just spend on almost anything. They're even somehow relating the healthcare plan of Obamacare to the transportation of goods. How do those even connect?
Right, right. And I remember in watching Michael Ferris present this, that especially the general welfare clause, so much of our federal spending, the part that's out of control is tied to the general welfare clause. And so it's really a problem. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. Okay, so let me just start out with objectives for this chapter that he put in here is really to understand the difference between the founder's original intent and what's going on right now with both of those clauses. Identify the limited scope of the general welfare clause. We'll talk a little bit about what welfare really meant to our founders versus the way we use it today.
Right, all right.
And then understand the ways in which Congress has abused the general welfare clause using federal mandates. We'll talk a little bit about those. And then understanding the ways in which the court's interpretations have allowed those two clauses to become basically a free ticket to Congress to spend what they want and where they want.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so just a couple terms. Welfare is basically as defined by the founders was the health, happiness, and the fortunes of the people. And that's a little different from the way we use it now. And the taxing and spending clause is considered the general welfare clause. Okay, found in Article 1, Section 8. And then commerce is just the trade and the movement of goods. That's all commerce is. So really, commerce was meant to be that when goods are made in a factory and they're put on the shipping dock, the Commerce Clause then comes into effect as the goods are picked up off the shipping dock, put on the truck, go across state lines or within the state, set back on the receiving dock. That's the end of the Commerce Clause. That was the original intent.
Right.
Okay. Just one more thing. I see that you are going to that, but and then the Commerce Clause gave them the power to regulate this among three groups. One was between the states, Indian tribes, and also foreign nations. So those were that was the scope of the Commerce Clause for them. And again, that's the trade and the transportation of goods. And then we'll talk at the end about a federal mandate, what those are. But basically, the government gives some information or a mandate for a state to do. And a lot of times they'll tie money to that. So if you'll do the mandate, you get the money. But if you don't, then you don't get the money. And so it's very tempting for states to go ahead and do whatever the government says because they need the money. And so it's kind of almost a little bit of bribery there.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
That's a strong term, but
right. That's a popular term.
Exactly. So talking about the Commerce Clause, then, as I already said, the three groups are among the states with Indian tribes and foreign nations, and that was the original intent of the founders, was just the transportation, because the 10th Amendment says that, and we'll get to that a little bit later, is that basically anything that wasn't explicit in the Constitution for Congress was given to the states, but the federal government wanted to do more than just that. So many of the things the states could handle, but since this was with foreign nations and Indian tribes and amongst each other, they needed a neutral federal government. It made sense for the federal government to have that task.
Am I right, though, that once again, unintended consequences, the Commerce Clause has blown into employee issues and employment and all sorts of areas that the Commerce Clause wasn't intended to govern. Am I right?
Absolutely. That's exactly what happened. I won't get into the cases, but they were trying to regulate, how they were treating their chickens and what was the minimum wage they were giving the people. And the Supreme Court was correct. They came in and they ruled and said, no, that's way too much power for the for the Commerce Clause, but they left the door open. They said they couldn't do things to indirectly affect, but they could regulate activities that directly affected commerce. So that left a kind of a loophole, an open door. And a little bit later, there was another case where they basically said they had a good ruling, and then they limited it a little bit by saying it had to be an economic activity. So that was good. So each one of these precedents, most of them allowed for just a bigger scope and a bigger scope. So today, people don't even bat an eye when Congress talks about spending millions or billions of dollars on things that have nothing to do with commerce, but they'll quote the Commerce Clause.
Right, right.
So I thought it was interesting that Obamacare was off the Commerce Clause.
Right, exactly.
How do you get transporting goods to a healthcare system you're mandated to implement?
Well, when you get through these clauses, I got one particular thing I want to bring up, but I'll save it until you get through the general welfare clause also.
Okay. Well, I'm ready to go ahead and jump on the general welfare clause.
Okay.
So
All right. Let's go through it.
So basically, the welfare of the people was their happiness. You know, that they were doing well. We come to think of welfare as government handouts. So we've gone way far away from the original intent of that. But there were two thoughts. James Madison thought, okay, the federal government is not allowed to spend money beyond the enumerated or explicit powers in the Constitution. But Alexander Hamilton had a view like, well, yes, they could. But what we did was the Supreme Court kind of sided with Hamilton's view. And since then, we've totally blown that up to say that basically with the General Welfare Clause, if it has anything to do with people or anything good, we can spend money on it. And so that has totally ballooned also. So where we're at is both of these clauses are a free ticket for Congress to spend.
Well, and the point I want to bring up and make here is that in Convention of States, one of the things that we want to see amendments proposed, to see amendments passed that would address things like this, to where we would restrain the federal government in its jurisdiction and interpretation, and pull as best as possible, pull the federal government back to the original intent of things like these two clauses. And so that's one of the main things that we in Convention of States believe needs to be done. And you know, both of these are perfect examples of how things have been interpreted in such a way that they've gone way beyond the original intent of these clauses in the Constitution.
Right, and it's interesting, these 200 and some years later, most people in our country don't realize how far we've gone because they don't really know what the Founding Fathers' intent was. So, you know,
Exactly.
95 out of 100 people have no clue that they're overspending.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so let's touch on, federal mandates. We already kind of talked about that. I think Common Core was one of those where, and I know you wanted to comment on this, where the government hands you a mandate and ties some, not always, but typically they'll tie money to it and say, hey, if you do this, you'll get this.
Right, right. The point I wanted to make is we have had state legislators say that as much as 60% of the state's budget is in fact tied to these federal mandates.
Wow.
And you know, when you stop and think about that, that's an awful lot.
It is.
But you're so right. These federal mandates come down. They're not funded, and the states have to end up funding them. So there's a lot of work to be done in controlling this particular area too.
Yeah, and so those are very popular. Now, I didn't realize it was as high as 60%. So that saddens me.
That's what they're saying. That's what they're telling us. Yes.
Okay. And then the 10th Amendment really talks about how the states have the power. Anything that the federal government doesn't have in the Constitution belongs to the states. And so there's been this whole thing about limiting the scope of the 10th Amendment now, too. We're trying to squelch what that 10th Amendment says, because that would go against the federal government having more power and more control and an ability to spend more money.
Right, right.
So basically, in conclusion, this whole ballooning of these two clauses has caused the federal government to usurp the state's power, to infringe on our freedoms, and to just blow up our national debt like crazy.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
So we need to speak up against that. That's
Well,
what the state's doing.
If you want to speak up against that, join Convention of States and help us.
That's right.
And help us take some steps to resolve this type of problem. All right, great, Debbie. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm trying to think here. I know we talked about when you're going to be coming back again, and looks like if everything goes as planned, we won't be having you back until February. Well, we're going to have you February 17th.
Yes.
You're going to come in and talk about this movement, or this what our president just signed, and that's the Religious Freedom. I want to say act. It's not an act, but anyway, Debbie's going to come back on February 17th and give us a presentation on the Religious Freedom movement.
Yes.
And then on the 24th of February, you'll be back for another chapter in constitutional literacy.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Debbie, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dale.
You have a good evening.
You too.
All right. All right. Let's now see, look at my time. Okay, well, we're looking pretty good here. So let me see if I can get us to the point that we want to get to here. Okay, let me bring up my PowerPoint presentation, and we'll talk about some things. Now, I'm going to implement the slideshow here option here, so I can give you a full screen as the viewer. All right. What I want to do now is I want to give you some information about some resources that we have available to us here in Indiana and nationally. But one of our main resources is our website, conventionofstates.com. You'll hear us make reference to this website frequently. We use it because it has a wealth of information, but it's also a tool that we use in administering our state. Our state website page is embedded in this national website, conventionofstates.com/Indiana. Obviously, a more focused look at the state of Indiana. Facebook, we're very big into Facebook. Our state Facebook page, Convention of States Indiana, I would urge you to look at that. As a matter of fact, our broadcast this evening comes to you through that Facebook page, Convention of States Indiana. YouTube channel, COS Indiana. YouTube channel is very much an educational resource for you. We have narrated PowerPoint presentations. We have recordings of these broadcasts that we bring to you. We also have links to a podcast that our one of our co-state directors and legislative liaison, Paul Phillips, does, and that's the Free to Be Free podcast. These are very, very good. They're excellent podcasts that Paul does, and we have links to all of his podcasts on our YouTube channel. Twitter, hashtag COS Indiana, Instagram, Convention of States Indiana, LinkedIn. If you're into social media and you're looking for us, we're out there. You shouldn't have any trouble finding us. Little information, some numbers here on how we're doing in the state of Indiana. We had in 2019, we surpassed 41,000 supporters here in the state of Indiana. We've been growing tremendously, and we're going to continue that growth. We have a lot of activities planned for 2020. Our goal for 2020, 52,000 supporters. About 2,900 volunteers. We have about 40 people in leadership positions. always looking for more people to be involved in leadership, go to that national website that I mentioned earlier, conventionofstates.com. Click on the menu selection, Take Action, and scroll down to Become a Leader and look at the different positions that we have. If anyone's of interest to you, read about it. And if you're really interested, make application. You're not obligated in any way. But what this does then is your name comes up on a report and that I see every day and a few others. And one of us then will be in contact with you to discuss it further with you. Once again, you're not obligated in any way on this. So that's the next step for you to take. All right. Let's talk about the three tenets briefly here of Convention of States that our movement is based on, and that's the problem, the solution, and the plan. Now, the problem is basically that our government lacks the will and the courage to address some basic structural issues that we feel need to be addressed. Now, we define those as abuses, and we've defined them into three abuses. Number one's the national debt. As you know, over $23 trillion now. This needs to be addressed, obviously. The second abuse is the regulatory crisis, which comes from our administrative state, which is considered the fourth branch of government now. And I know our current administration has been eliminating some regulations, but much, much, much more needs to be done in this area, and especially controlling how they are created. The last area has to do with state sovereignty. When the country was founded, the concept of dual federalism was in play, where both the federal government and the states would share equally in power. Well, that's gone all very much in favor of the federal government, as we know. We believe career politicians play a big role in this, so term limits, we believe, is something that is needed. All right, what's the solution to this, to these problems? We believe it's right in Article 5 of our Constitution. Article 5 describes the two methods of how the Constitution can be amended. And let's look at those very briefly here. Method number one is where 2/3 of Congress propose an amendment or amendments, and then those have to be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures. That's 38 states before any one of them become an amendment to the Constitution. Well, there's a second method in Article 5, and folks, we are not making this up. This is right in Article 5, and that's where 2/3 of the state legislatures apply to conduct a convention of states for the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution. Any amendments, any proposed amendments that come out of the convention would then have to go through the same ratification process as the first method. 3/4 of the states, or 38 states, would have to ratify any proposed amendments. And when we might mention that 2/3 of the state legislatures need to make application to hold the convention, and that equals 34 states would have to make application. All right, well, what's our plan? Our plan to bring this about in two parts. The first part is the actual application that is used to call for this convention. The application addresses three main areas: fiscal restraints, limiting power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and term limits. Those are the three areas that we believe need to be addressed, need amendments proposed that will address the abuses that we've earlier mentioned. So this is very important because this is the subject matter of the application is what determines the agenda at the convention. So these are the three areas that we believe the agenda should be based upon. The other part of our plan is mobilizing the grassroots. And when I say the grassroots, I'm talking about citizens and state legislators, mobilizing you and me and our state legislators to get this done. We're now across the country. We're in all 50 states. Convention of States is in all 50 states. We have over 4 million supporters now all across the country. As I mentioned, we just went over 41,000 here in the state of Indiana. So our momentum is building. We have 15 states have applied to hold this convention. Indiana is one of those states. We were number 6 to do it. So we have 15 states that have applied. We got to get to 34 for this convention to happen. So if you want to start the New Year's off right and get involved in Convention of States, now's the time to do it. And just go to our national website, conventionofstates.com, and open an account and sign the petition and get involved. All right. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much, folks. Now I want to, let me see who we have here tonight. I see Susan Lyon is with us tonight. Susan, let me get, there you go. And Rick and Susan are here with us tonight. Now, both of these are new. These are good examples. I'm glad Susan came on tonight. These two have just recently stepped forward as volunteers to get involved in leadership positions with us here in the state. And Rick is going to be our events coordinator, which we have been looking for someone in that area for a long time. So we're so happy to have Rick step forward for that. And Susan wants to be one of our social media warriors. So she'll be getting involved in our Facebook page and all sorts of other social media platforms. So very, very good, Susan. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I don't know, see if this, oh, okay. And she's asking, are there any worthy programs that would be lost if we went back to enacting the original clause? Is there some consideration? For modernization? And yes, to answer that question, yes, we would have to obviously be aware of if we return back to the original intent of a lot of things, we'd have to be aware of what we might be giving up to do that. But going back to the original intent is not meant to be all encompassing. So hope that helps, Susan. All right. Don't see any others on right now, so we'll move on. Now, I want to mention to you then very quickly here that our next broadcast, of course, will be on next Monday evening, January 27th. And I'm going to have Paul Phillips come on. You've seen him, I know, on previous broadcasts with us. So I'm going to have Paul come on and going to have Paul take us through how the steps that you go through to join Convention of States. And we're actually we're going to test out a new feature that we have in our upgraded software for this broadcast. So this will enable Paul to do some things that a guest wasn't able to do in the previous software version. So that's I don't want to get too far in the weeds on that. But so Paul's going to show you how to go on the website, open an account, sign the petition, and look through, maybe look at some leadership positions, and we'll just have a little fun, and hopefully this will help any of you that are out there considering getting involved in Convention of States. I hope this will show you how easy that is to do. So that's what we have planned for next Monday evening, January 27th. All right. Okay, let me bring up what I like to use for our closing. And I like to close with a quote that our president, Mark Meckler, has made that I really, really think is a great quote. And he has said that, there's a fundamental question facing our country today. And the question is not what should we do? The question is who will decide? And I just think that's so important, because at Convention of States, we believe we the people should have a bigger say so in these decisions. So basically, the question facing us is a two-word question, very simply: who decides? And we believe that should be we the people. So, folks, I know we're starting out the new year. We're still in the month of January. We're starting the new year. If you have made any New Year's resolutions, any kind of a resolution to get more involved in your government, more involved in your country, please consider joining Convention of States and get involved with us, because, ladies and gentlemen, we believe we're saving the country. We believe our movement is what is needed to save our country. So we would love to have your involvement, and we will look forward to you being involved with us. So with that, I'm going to say good night to everyone, and thank you again for joining us this evening. So good night.